question, let me make a disclaimer, because I am a very controversial guy. Because I have a tendency to say things just pretty brutal and blunt. I'm here actually representing Tomas from United Abolitionists, who was supposed to be here and couldn't go. So I am a very cheap stand-in for Tomas. So anything that I say that's good, please credit Tomas with that. Anything that I say controversial, it's my opinion. Okay, I don't hold it against him. A couple of things that I'll say very, very quickly is, first of all, we have to understand the nature of trafficking. Nate said it well. I won't spend time talking about underfunded, lack of resources. All of that is very true. It's also relatively a new crime. It just got passed, not a new crime as far as being done, but being able to charge somebody with human trafficking was only federally framed up in the year 2000. Florida was 3 or 4 years after that. So it's kind of this newer criminal thing that we're still all trying to figure out. We're getting a lot better, but it took a long time to kind of ramp up to really go after this. The other thing is, and I think Nate alluded to it, is masking crimes. Human trafficking masks itself as other criminal activities. Prostitution. It will masquerade as prostitution, solicitation, drug trafficking, shoplifting. There are so many masking crimes that are kind of easier for law enforcement to go after and grab for a shoplifting without peeling back the cover. Why are you stealing 3 boxes of condoms? You know, that would require additional investigation. We're getting better at doing that. The other thing I would tell you is that this is not Tomas anymore. So this is coming to me. I was in front of the Senate testifying, and one of the senators asked me. They said, because we were talking about supply and demand when it came to human trafficking, there's a human trafficking triangle, and that visually says for trafficking to happen, you need this triangle to be in play. On one side's a victim, one side's a trafficker, and that bottom side of the triangle is a buyer. The buyer is what throws demand into the trafficking triangle, which then creates this market for supply. Does that make sense? And when we talk about that, we've used the term $150 billion a year for at least 11 or 12 years in our presentations. The International Labor Organization just revised that number, and that number went up 37%. And now we're looking at $236 billion a year. NASDAQ came out with their 2024 report and has it at $346 billion. And between trafficking of humans and trafficking of drugs, those 2 criminal activities alone account for over 1/3 of all illicit criminal activity in the world. Think about that. How much money's driving this. And if money's driving it, who's involved? Who's the buyer? Well, predominantly it's men. Not exclusively, which is why Frank said we need men engaging. We need men confronting men, period, in this fight. We have depended on the women to carry this fight against this criminal activity for way too long. It's time for men to stand up, get a backbone, and confront other men and say, buying another human being is not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. So I'm testifying for the Senate. Get off my story, I'll be quick. I want to wrap up. I didn't mean to even talk much today. But I'm testifying for the Senate. There's one senator asked me, well, Alan, why is it that we can't really go after the buyer? Which I thought was kind of because they're the lawmakers, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of interesting. But me being Alan, said to them, as I looked at this dais of men, predominantly one woman, the rest were men, setting up on this big dais, looking down at this little podium that you're standing behind. And I said, because, Senator, the buyer looks just like you.
Whoa.
And the senator looked at me and said, what'd you say, Alan? Well, don't ask me a question if you don't want to answer it. So then I looked the other way and said, because the buyer looks just like all of you. Why? Because the most common buyer, now again, it's not exclusive, but the most common buyer is a white male in his mid to late 40s, makes over $100,000 a year, and is in positions of power and influence. So you tell me why we can't go after this crime. And then when I do arrest the buyer, do you know what he gets? A misdemeanor. But if I arrest the victim gets a felony. So it's time for us to really look at the buyer again and say this: you are equally culpable for the trauma being inflicted on the victim as the trafficker is. And if the trafficker's copping a felony, it's time for the buyer to get a felony and let them know it's not okay to buy humans.
Alan's such a powerhouse.
Yes, he is. Spot on.
Lauderdale, Florida. And I worked all week to get this PowerPoint presentation come up. I think I spoke for maybe 12 to 15 minutes. I was like one of my first public speaking events ever. And like I was so excited. My mom was there. Alan calls me up. He's got no slides, nothing. Comes from the heart. Drops it just like he did. 45 minutes. I said, Sarah, don't ever put me before. Ever again. Talking about these resources.